All right, comrades and friends, welcome to our program this evening, sponsored by Freedom Road Socialist Organization. We're going to be discussing defeating Trump, the elections, and U.S. capitalism. We'll start just by introducing ourselves. We can go around.
Hey everybody, my name is Michael Sampson. I'm with the National Desk of the National
All
Alliance
right,
Against Racist and Political
comrades and friends,
Repression.
welcome to our program
Here
this
in
evening, sponsored by
Jacksonville
Freedom
with
Road
the
Socialist
Jacksonville
Organization.
Community Action
We're going to
Committee,
be
and I'm
discussing
also
defeating
a
Trump, the
member of the
elections,
Freedom
and
Road
U.S.
Socialist
capitalism.
Organization.
We'll start just by
Hi, everyone. My name is Marisol Marquez. I go by Sol, and I'm all the way in Los Angeles on this beautiful day. And I'm also a member of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. But locally, I do a lot of work with an organization called Community Service Organization, or CSO.
My name is Masao Suzuki. I'm a professor of economics at Skyline College. I'm a longtime activist in the Japanese American community here in San Jose. I'm a regular writer on the economy for Fight Back News, and I'm also the chair of the Joint Nationalities Commission of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
Hi, and I'm Steph York. I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm the political secretary of Freedom Road Socialist Organization and am a member of Union Local and have been active in trade union politics and trade union work for more than 20 years. So thanks, everyone. Welcome. It's really great to see you all in person since we haven't had any opportunities to see each other in real life for many months now. So after many, many days of waiting for the outcome, Joe Biden was declared the winner of the election last night, and he'll be the next president of the United States. Trump continues to claim fraud and dispute the election, something we thought might happen. But I was just wondering about you all's point of view about the election and its outcome. Do we need to take Trump's threats seriously, and what any concerns in your areas?
Yeah, so locally, in Los Angeles, I think I'm pretty fortunate that I live in like a state like California where naturally things tend to go blue, right? And so not a lot of worry goes into people's minds when they think about, California. They're not worried and watching it kind of like we were in Nevada, right? And I know that I have like a little map, but as a Chicana or our important line to FRSO, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, is that the Chicano Nation, or commonly known as the Southwest, it tends to be dominated by a lot of our thinking, right? Chicano thinking. And so the results around that area was definitely more blue, with the exception of Texas, which is a little different. It tends to be a little different. And we have some friends. I've been talking to a couple of people along the border down near the tip of Texas. And if you close up on Texas, you can see that near Laredo or like Corpus Christi area, around that border area, it went blue, as opposed to the rest of the state that doesn't have these high populations of Chicanos. So it was something else to see that again this time around. And obviously there's an influence of Chicanismo, of our people affected by policies that, Trump put the hammer on. So I felt like that was important to note this time around.
I think down in, I'm based in Jacksonville, which is kind of on the outer edge of the Black Belt Nation, in the Southeast. And I think we saw with the election, Georgia, particularly Atlanta, and a lot of Black centers in the core of the Black Belt play an important factor in defeating Trump. You saw the maximization of kind of a lot of turnout in areas that necessarily hadn't turned out in the past election in 2016 that really turned out to really defeat Trump. And I think a lot of that was fueled by the movement, and was a primary factor. When you look at in Atlanta, the fact that 90% of Black youth went to the polls to defeat Joe Biden. And as well, you saw that, the National Alliance Against Race and Political Repression, we call it National Days of Action, May 30th, as well in June. May 30th and June the 6th, actually. June the 6th was actually one of the highest days in the nation in terms of people registering to vote. And I think that was also the same week that Trump sent gas on protesters in DC just so he can have a photo op. And I think that June 6th weekend was probably one of the largest mobilizations we've seen nationally in the nation, with a lot of our cities playing a key role. Of course, Twin Cities, Justice for Jamar, really led a lot of the initial protest after the Minneapolis uprisings. So going back to the Southeast, I think you see a lot of hope, not in the Biden administration, but in the potential that mass movements can create. Even in Jacksonville, where we're very active in all fronts. Jacksonville actually voted to defeat the Republican candidate for the first time since Jimmy Carter in '76, which is kind of unprecedented in a lot of ways. Although Florida, Trump won handedly in Florida due to a lot of votes down in lack of turnout in Miami and among other areas. I think in North Florida, which is commonly referred as Southern Georgia, Southern Alabama, you did see kind of an increase in mobilization, which I think is an important factor in the movement we're building for self-determination. I think we have to look at these elections as a test of sorts, but how are we relating, this movement that we're building to these elections? And I think the fact that we put out this line to defeat Trump, I think it was a successful one that kind of drew us a lot closer to a lot of forces in the movement, and really kind of brought out a lot of people in the streets, and it was evident by that on November 3rd.
I'd just like to add that I think it was the people's struggle for 5 years now, starting in 2016, even before Trump became president. When he was just running for president, there were protests against Trump, the big protests around the Muslim travel ban, the Women's March, fighting his caging of refugees on the US-Mexican border, and of course his support for killer cops in the wake of the George Floyd murder. I think all of those had a big impact on the actual vote. And I'd like to add that the vote itself actually wasn't that close. There was this 4 or 5 day drama played out over the media, but that's just because of our electoral college system. Biden, the last time I checked, is more than 4 million votes ahead of Trump. And there's actually over 2 million votes still to be counted in California, which won't change the electoral college, but Biden could end up with 5 or even more million vote gain over Trump. And so in that sense, if you just look at the popular vote, it really wasn't as close as the media made it out to be.
Yeah, it's clear that Trump lost the election, and that the vast majority voted to defeat Trump. Should we be? And yet he's having major temper tantrums on Twitter, in all caps, about that he's been cheated, and he's going to use all legal strategies, and he's going to take it to the Supreme Court. Do you people think that we should take that that the threats Trump is making seriously, or do we think it's primarily bluster? And what do we and how should and if you do think that we should take it seriously, how should we respond if it looks like he's actually going to try to remain in office for 4 years, even though he lost the election?
I mean, what I'll say is, especially in Florida, given that it is like a, red state, not in the good red, but the other red, it is a red state. I mean, Trump does have a movement. And I think Trump has built a movement, using his office the past couple of years to really galvanize the Proud Boys, a lot of far right elements that kind of, in the past Republican administrations hadn't really been frontlined, and saw the president, kind of really show solidarity with them like he's
Yeah.
done. I think it's something to definitely keep tabs on. I mean, I'm not as sure. I think it's going to go with his legal strategy, and how that goes. But these folks have organized themselves and have called marches, have called caravans. They aren't just people on Twitter, talking trash. And especially when you have, Republican governors like Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, who was, essentially elected governor because Trump tweeted that people should support him. When he's proposing legislation like an anti-protest bill that, incentivizes, if there's a protest block in the street and you run people over and you claim that you're running for your life, you would be exonerated of that, given immunity. I mean, legislation like that is going to empower the same kind of elements that Trump also empowers. So I definitely think it's something that we have to be keen on. But as we've seen, over this past year, our ability to organize in the mass movement and grow our organizations, I mean, that's our best defense to anything that Trump could try to do.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I think we have to remain vigilant and take the threat seriously, but uh, and respond to events. And we saw we participated in the Twin Cities. We participated in the mobilization called by the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression on November 4th. That both called for the defeat of Trump and to not let Trump steal the election, and for People's Agenda. We mobilized thousands of people, took the highway, and got 650 of us arrested. But those are the kinds of popular mobilizations that will be required if we see a serious threat. But we should remain vigilant and watch, I think. So I wanted to. So go ahead, Sal.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add. Quite a while ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago, the Chinese leader Mao Zedong called U.S. imperialism a paper tiger, and he said that strategically, in the long run, it's paper. It's going to collapse. But in the short run, it's a real tiger, and it's going to wound people. And I think Trump is like that. I think I'm very confident that on January 21st, 2021, he will be out of the White House. But between now and then, definitely he's a real tiger and can really, attack the people. So I agree that we need to be vigilant these next 2.5 months. And it's no time to sort of exhale and take a break and wait for the new administration to come save the day.
Yes, I appreciate that you asked the question this way too, Steph. Is that like, can we just like go home now, like Masao is saying, or do we remain vigilant? And I think that also, like, maybe a lot of people who haven't visited or lived in California, they think that it's like some sanctuary state. Obviously there's like a bill that does call it a sanctuary state if you're undocumented, but the reality is much different than that. And especially when you live in Los Angeles, where it's super duper expensive. And even though marijuana is legal, you do get killed for just smoking weed, right? That happened to Paul Rea, a very young 18-year-old here in East Los Angeles by East LA sheriffs. And so, these types of attacks on our people have definitely been fueled by people like Trump. And I would say that we also participated in the National Call for the Alliance on November 4th, the day after the election. Even though we didn't know for sure if Trump had won or not, we could already feel it in the crowd in Boyle Heights. It's a working class neighborhood of mostly Chicanos, mostly undocumented people. And, it's notoriously been that way throughout history. And when we saw that people were coming out and they were kind of like, their energy was kind of like already accepting that Trump had lost, it was, for us locally, it was kind of like, oh, okay, so this is kind of like how people are feeling. Nobody's really like ready to go picket and march over to like the government building downtown, right? So it was nice to kind of like feel that and to be able to be on the streets the day after the election and feel where people are and talk to people in your own neighborhood who are from the neighborhood. And so I think that that's extremely important that, you know, Trump, while he has been able to incite a bunch of really racist people, we have to be real about that, right? It's a fact. He does do that. He does make white supremacists organize themselves. And so in the same manner, we've been able to organize ourselves to protest that, to counter that. And thanks to you know, big networks like the Alliance, we've been able to be doing these national days of action. And thankfully we were ready to go just in case Trump did something that was just absurd and very Trump-esque, being
Right.
called through his Twitter, of course.
Yeah, right. Well, and so, I mean, I think this has been a really good overview, sort of from the perspective of the, you know, national news. But I wanted to next kind of get a little more focused. And so, you know, we as Freedom Road took the position in this election that this election was an census referendum on the past 4 years, and that that everyone who could vote should vote to defeat Trump. And let's see, believing that because we believe that it's a more favorable context for a struggle. And, you know, I bring this up because this point of view has been controversial amongst other Marxists and amongst the left generally. And I'm wondering how this point of view has been received in your area, within your work, within the people that you work with and talk to.
Well, at least within my area, you know, my city and area of the country, given the conditions, if we would have took a different position, we would have, in a lot of ways, been ostracized from the broader mass movement. You know, you got to think of the 2016. There were thousands of new activists nationwide who got into the movement because of Trump. And for you know, for us to take a position that he shouldn't be defeated would have been, you know, silly on our part if we're trying to unite with those, you know, trade unionists, those same folks, you know, in the community that really got activated from Trump's election, and really the emboldening of white supremacy that he really did after the Charlottesville massacre of sorts, and among other things, you know. So from that perspective, it was definitely, you know, the proper decision, and, you know, it wasn't really controversial, at least where I'm at, given how relatively weak the Democratic Party is in general, and how we knew that it was just going to really take a grassroots movement really to defeat Trump, and get people out there to defeat Trump. I mean, I do think, you know, we have no illusions on what class the Democratic Party serves. You know, what interests, you know, Joe Biden's history, the 94 crime bill, as well as his work with segregationists in the past, as well as Senator Harris, you know, Vice President-elect Harris, past work as Attorney General in California, you know, how she fought police reform or police accountability, you know, how she called herself the top cop. You know, we make no allusions to that. I just think under the Trump administration, partly because of maybe his own callous or something, you just saw an escalation, especially after the Floyd rebellion, Minneapolis uprising. He made political repression a campaign slogan, you know, much different than what we've seen, you know, as an organization. You know, we've had our own issues with, you know, repression on the Democrats. So we make no allusions to that under Joe Biden. It'll be much different. However, I think there is, you know, Trump's Department of Justice and how it was prosecuting, you know, activists like in Philadelphia, Ant Smith, who's a teacher, you know, who months later he was pulled out of his house in the morning and was arrested for a cop car being burnt down on May 30th, you know, with no direct evidence. You know, stories like that, you know, that's just absurd, you know. And I think it was a political, you know, it was something that Trump ran with to, you know, label BLM and the movement as the enemy of the people, and they must be defeated, and you must vote for me to do that. And I think, the movement really defeated him at the polls. And I think, we're going to have to keep building on that movement to fight back against repression. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression was formed, to fight, to defend the people's movements. And I think more now than ever, we have to keep fighting to defend our movements, because, these forces that are trying to criminalize our protests, they may not be in the White House, but they may try other stuff from the White House, or especially locally here in Florida, like I brought up that protest bill. I mean, that's an outright attack on our ability to organize and really fight for what we're trying to fight for. So we have to, like the first question, we have to stay vigilant and keep organizing.
Yeah, this was I think it was kind of locally a controversial position to take, right? As Freedom Road Socialist Organization, we pretty much believe in the overthrow of the system, right? So why take a position on, like, oh, if you can vote, you should probably go vote for Biden, or against Trump, right? That was kind of like what people were saying locally. And it is California. It is the place that kind of like went to Bernie before this election. And so, it is kind of like a thing that maybe if you're you understand what we talk about, maybe it is kind of weird to hear us say go and kick Trump out by voting against him, right? But I think it, just like Mike said, like what would it have done if we had said, screw Trump, screw Biden too, he's just like Trump, right? It's actually incorrect. It's not true. And while we do understand that, there has been historically attacks under the Obama and Biden administration, especially on our organization, right? There were raids in 2010 under Obama. And, there were record amounts of deportations, for example, of the undocumented. We do understand too, though, that under Obama and Biden, there was DACA, right? Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And that is probably something that would not ever have happened and will not happen under Trump, right? We have to be real. There is a difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. However, our line as FRSO, it did say that, if there is a victory with Biden, then we have to continue pushing our agenda, and what does that mean locally for us? It means, advocating for the people's agenda. And that's for the working class, for the undocumented, for people who are being killed by police, and, any other conditions that are local that you need to be fighting for.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. The Republicans and the Democratic Party both represent the capitalist class, and they don't represent the workers. And they don't represent the workers. But I agree. There's a material I agree that conditions for struggle will be better under Biden. We can only expect, after Trump rolled out the kind of repression he did this summer, including the literal assassination of Michael Reinhold without trial. Michael was accused of killing someone in Portland, but Homeland Security assassinated him rather than arrest him and put him on trial. And and organizing in those kinds of conditions can be very difficult. And as you mentioned DACA, so many of the most amazing and energetic activists that I was on the street with on Wednesday night are DACA recipients who would not be able to be on the street, who might feel like it was too risky to be on the street. If they didn't have DACA. So there's a number of ways I think that the context for struggle is improved with Biden being elected. That doesn't mean that they're both not our class enemy, because they are.
I had one quick interjection. It was about, even from the standpoint of labor, AFGE, which is a federal workers union, represents a lot of federal employees. I mean, workers, Trump under 4 years essentially decimated that union. And had Trump gotten reelected, that union may not exist in a couple of years. And even when it hit the Trump's National Labor Relations Board, a lot of the recent rulings that really led materially to people losing their jobs, labor rulings that weren't, fair to the workers. I mean, things of that nature. I mean, stuff you don't really see, like the way his agencies were acting were particularly aggressive towards his agenda of privatization. Bessie DeVos, Secretary of Education, and the agenda that she was pushing for the 1%. I mean, not that, Arnie Duncan under Obama was any better, but, you had a little billionaire who was like, pushing charter schools, even more intensely than the predecessor. So I think that stuff matters when it comes to our movement and building and the grounds and the groundwork we have in terms of having more favorable conditions to build a movement. It's hard to build a movement when the boot is on your neck. I felt like under Trump the past couple of years, we were fighting back against a lot of more egregious things, laws and whatnot. So the conditions are more favorable for us to really go on the offensive in a lot of areas, especially with the National Alliance, fighting for community control of the police, fighting for a people's mandate. I mean, I think, it shows that we have the ability to do that, more so if we aren't just facing the death stare of Trump's, repressive agenda down our faces.
Ms. Dowdy, did you have anything that you wanted to throw in before I jump to the next question?
I'll pass.
I actually did want to add something too, Steph.
Yeah.
Locally for us, how it looked is, we had like a very tight race in Los Angeles against this district attorney who is African American, and her name is Jackie Lacey, right? Like if you're in LA or LA County, yeah, boo indeed, Mike. You know her name, and you know that, one of the biggest slogans around her was Jackie Lacey must go. Or during the election, it was Buy Jackie 2020, which I thought was really clever. And that was invented by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. So in Los Angeles, we actually, we partnered with Black Lives Matter, and we went out to door knock on October 25th. We did an entire event where we told people come out to a neighborhood called El Sereno, which is in Northeast Los Angeles. It's a very working class neighborhood, predominantly Chicano, predominantly like Spanish speakers. And, it was really cool to have Black Lives Matter there because, like it's LA. So, Black people do speak Spanish. So it was really cool. And, having folks like knock on doors and team up with like, maybe if you don't know Spanish, you can team up with like the Chicana who does. And that was one of our members, Lucia. She, for the first time ever, she voted. And she was 17 years old when we met her. She organized an event for George Floyd. And, we were able to successfully win against Jackie Lacey. She got voted out. This would have been her third term, y'all. And under her, there were over 600 deaths, and she only prosecuted one cop. And it wasn't because he killed somebody. It was because of something else, So unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the way that this system runs is if you do want to get things changed politically, you kind of do have to touch at least the elections. You do kind of have to mention it. We don't exist in a vacuum. If revolutionaries sat in a vacuum, we'd be very lonely. But we do kind of have to participate in other things. And, people came out. There was a huge demonstration against Jackie Lacey, but also a huge victory, when she lost. Down by the district attorney's office in Los Angeles downtown, there was a huge celebration. And I know that there's like a slide, kind of showing that day. But that was on, November 4th. That was the day after we found out that she had lost. And so, what a great way to celebrate than by protesting her once again with Black Lives Matter after they've been doing so for 3 years, So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think I think the fact is that elections are how most people in this country relate to politics. We want to bring them into the street, certainly, but if we can't even talk to them about the election and the politicians and the candidates, and we don't have a position, then I think it's much harder to do that. Speaking about where people are at, Trump got more votes than some people expected. Certainly Nate Silver. Why does he have a job still? But but uh, but also just in general, uh, Trump got more votes than expected, and you know, um, because of all the mail ballots, it's going to be challenging to do a lot of meaningful demographics, unless you really, uh, go census block by census block to try to figure out how people voted. But because Trump voters were overrepresented, but let's talk about how we think the pandemic and the economy and the current high tide of struggle against national oppression impacted the election and who came out and, why did Florida vote for Trump?
Like that's a direct question.
Yeah.
Florida's not really a
That
swing
was a
state.
call out.
Florida's Florida's a state that, you could potentially win all the cities and still lose the state. It's a state that definitely, the rural areas, like other states like Wisconsin and stuff, have a high representation in regards to the voting count. Trump's, in 2016, he essentially ran up the margins in all those rural areas. Um, and that played a significant factor in his victory in 2016, but also in 2020. But especially in Miami, with Cuban Americans, there was like an 11% swing that went towards Trump. Trump had did a lot of work down there, talking about the horrors of socialism, how Biden was a puppet of Castro. God rest his soul. Angel Castro, just whatever. With Biden,
I mean, to just break in, I always want to. Whenever someone says that, I always want to, on Twitter or on social media, I always want to say, believe me, as a real socialist, I can tell you that Biden is nothing like a socialist.
Yeah, totally.
The thing is, the Democratic Party here in Florida, especially South Florida, I mean, they were like, yeah, socialism sucks, Castro sucks, Maduro, everything bad too, but still vote for us and not Trump. You know what I mean? So if you're essentially tailing Trump's foreign policy slogans in Cuba, I mean, probably not going to make good leverage. But you did see that swing. But I think in Atlanta you saw a huge amount of African Americans go out to vote to defeat Trump. You saw that in Jacksonville. Jacksonville's a city that's a third African American. Large proportion of that vote went to defeat Trump at the polls as well. So I mean, it's part of the same issues we've had in Florida. I mean, you still see that popping up. You had a lower turnout in South Florida as well, and in Miami, which is where the Democrats, in order to win, they have to run up huge margins there because it has such a large population. But what I will say is, there's been a lot of, Trump's votes did increase. But I guess then again, more people to defeat Trump than voted for any candidate ever. You know what I mean? So that's a factor to look at. If you look at some of the exit polls from the New York Times that came out, it clearly showed that for those making under 50,000 a year, 57% of those went to vote to defeat Donald Trump. Voted for Joe Biden. For those making over 100,000 a year, 54% of those went for Trump. So, you hear a lot of stuff about, the, working class that voted for Trump. The working class did not vote for Trump. The working class voted to defeat Trump at the polls, as well as with union membership. 58% of union members, according to the FRSO, voted to defeat Trump at the polls, too, up 4% from 2016. That's still not the best number that we want to see, of course, but I do think it's incumbent to look at the numbers and what it showed, and the numbers showed that masses of people, the working class, the oppressed nations. I mean, in Aztlan, Arizona, we saw that. I mean, they wanted to defeat Trump. Trump was a particularly egregious character, and he drove people to the polls for him, and he drove people to the polls to defeat him. And thankfully for us in our movement, he was defeated.
Social
Yeah, you know, Steph, I think that this is like an important thing to note because I think a lot of people just think that like it's a white thing, you know. Sometimes I think we get kind of slapped with the you know, social justice term. What is it? Privilege politics, yeah, or like, you know, colorism, just something that's not very concrete, you know. There are white Latinos, for example, but I would have to say that you know, bringing it back to class really kind of like, you know, it the numbers spoke for themselves. You had you know, about 57% of people voting for Biden who make under $50,000 a year, and then you have, you know, 54% or 53ish%, you know, voting for Trump who make over $100,000. Like that's just so. I think it's absurd, right? But it really speaks to where people are at in terms of their economic background. I know that there was like, you know, if we're paying attention to Twitter or people, what people say on social media and stuff, there was like somebody who got really roasted online on Twitter because they had made they thought that they were the 1% because they made about $100,000 a year. And which is like really funny, right? Like 100,000 is nothing to somebody who's part of the 1%. Like you have people like Jeff Bezos who can make like $16 billion in like one day, right? Or something, whatever it was that he made. That's the 1%, you know, somebody who's so detached, who has so many zeros after the one that, you know, you even somebody who makes $100,000 a year, they can't reach those levels in their lifetime in terms of money. But that's the kind of people who think that they're part of the 1% and voted for Trump. And so I think that, you know, it is surprising that, you know, lots of people came out and voted for Trump, but that's exactly what's happening here. It's, you know, there is a division between people. And I think that, you know, whatever it is, people are thinking that their economic background might be tied closer to Trump, or, you know, they're not, they're for the working class. But we do have to be conscious that it's a larger percentage of people who are part of the working class, who are poor, who aren't making enough money to be able to pay the bills. And we are the ones who stand everything to gain if this system is overthrown, right? So no matter who's sitting in the White House, Biden won this time, you know, and I think it is a good thing, but we still have to keep pushing to make sure that the rest of us are also free, that we're liberated, and that we're not oppressed.
Masao?
Yeah, I just want to add too that I think one of the things that Freedom Road has that many other Marxist groups in the United States don't is we look at questions in terms of nationality, not in terms of race. Because I think if you look at both the so-called Latino vote and the Asian vote, they're less democratic than the African American vote. But that's because you're grouping together different nationalities with different, you know, you're grouping together Chicanos and Mexicanos and Central Americans who voted almost as much for Biden as African Americans did. And then on the other hand, you have Cuban Americans, which, you know, tend to support the Republican Party. Same thing with Asian Americans. There's some Asian American groups that are very strongly Democratic. And then there's others like the Vietnamese that, because of their strong tendency towards anti-communism, again, tend to vote more Republican. And so I do think the fact that we look at the national question and how actual communities, what their interests are, their class forces are, and their politics are, gives us an advantage in terms of looking at what happened. And it's not actually that surprising if you have a lot of Cubans and South Americans who might have fled, say, Venezuela, who support Trump, then it's not, yeah, anyway, it's not really surprising.
And one in Florida, there was, there was talk about the vote that's, but amongst Puerto Ricans, 67% of them voted for Biden. You know, so it's not like the numbers like Masao said is, you know, oftentimes, you know, they want to put everybody into one big box, you know, Black, Hispanic, you know, whatever. And that just doesn't really bear out in regards to the conditions they face. And also, I brought up that New York Times exit poll, and it was kind of fascinating. For the Democrats, 91% of those who were polled said, you know, racial inequality was the first issue they went to the polls for.
Yep.
So I think it's clear that, you know, the BLM marches, the uprising over the summer, but as well as Trump's constant need to, you know, tell the white supremacists that he's on their side. I mean, I think that played a significant factor in terms of moving people to vote. And, you know, the fight against national oppression is a continued force that will keep, you know, movements going and will, you know, defeat all those in its way.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick, kind of like what Ms. Sal said in terms of like our line as Freedom Road Socialist Organization. You know, we do believe in oppressed nations, that the U.S. is a prison house of nations, right? And that includes the Black Belt South, African Americans, Chicanos in the Southwest, you know, Hawaiians, Puerto Ricans, and Alaskan Natives, right? And other American Indians here in the U.S. And it is very interesting to see the breakdown of numbers in terms of like the Latino vote, right? And I love putting that in quote because exactly like you have, you know, Cuban, where I'm going to put it also in quotes, exiles, right? Who leave communism. I'm going to also put that in quotes because it's not really communism in Cuba. It's socialism, right? We haven't seen communism in Cuba yet. And so, you know, they're fleeing basically the way that Cuba is in a socialist country is, you know, you have to participate in the way of making sure that the rest of society can live equally, right? Unlike the US, where you have people like Jeff Bezos determining the future of people who, you know, don't even make $20 an hour. And so I would have to say that the fact that, you know, people like the Cubans who tend to be very, very right wing and very anti-immigrant, very anti-undocumented, and they're lumping those numbers into our Latino votes is just kind of like a slap in the face. Have Central Americans and Chicanos and Puerto Ricans who notoriously go blue. And, you know, you had Trump who went to Puerto Rico after the hurricane and threw paper towels at them, you know. These are things that people are not going to forget. You know, that's the same folks who are not going to turn around and say, thank you, Trump. We appreciate the paper towels. We'll vote for you. That's not going to happen. But also, like, we have to remember that under the Obama and Biden administration, there were attacks in Central America, right? In Honduras, there was a coup d'etat in 2009. Secretary of Defense Hillary Clinton did launch, she okayed some attacks in Honduras, you know? And yet, and I even have a friend who is from Florida and whose mom self-deported under President Obama's administration. And we have to also remember that, you know, these same folks who are coming into the U.S. because of the destabilization of their countries back home at the hands of the U.S., they're still conscious enough to understand politically that, you know, they're not in favor of Trump. And even if it was under Obama and Biden and Hillary Clinton, that their own areas were destabilized and coups happened, and now their countries are suffering, they still understand that they should not be voting for Trump. And, you know, that's something very different than a Cuban American would be doing, or somebody who's like really, really well off and is from South America, who is notoriously also anti-communist.
I think it's really important that we put the struggle against national oppression front and center, and but I don't want to sidestep the issue of that Trump was able to leverage the sort of in the suburbs, the fear of Black Lives Matter, and leverage it effectively, and that he does effectively leverage white chauvinism that exists among some people. You know, as Michael said, a lot of people want to talk about Trump's base as being workers, but the fact is that Trump's base is the petty bourgeoisie. We analyzed after the 2016 election, when we had some better numbers, that you know, it's the people who make over 100,000, and interestingly, the people who Marxists consider the petty bourgeoisie, who look to the media like workers. I like to call them the broke ass petty bourgeoisie. you know, I got a truck and so I got a job, Joe's stump pulling service. But you know, we have the problem where they look at Trump and they think and they believe, as Mark Twain said, that they're just frustrated millionaires, and someday their ship will come in, and uh, you know, but the fact is, you know, in many ways they're doing very badly. And, you know, but you see that contradiction in the election in Florida, which voted for Trump, which the majority of people voted for Trump and also passed the $15 an hour minimum wage by a 60 to 40% margin. And, you know, uh, the problem with both of the political parties in this country being the parties of the bourgeoisie is that they don't do things or offer programs or plans that appeal to workers. They, you know, have very little to offer. Uh, the Democrats or the Republicans, and I guess the Republicans currently are better at offering the false dream that's never going to happen. That if they they can, you know,
So true.
stop being the broke ass petty bourgeoisie and join the ranks of the $100,000 club, which apparently they think are the 1%. Ms. Dow, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I mean, Trump's also a little bit out of touch when he started trying to do his dog whistle racist appeal to the suburbs, because I think he's thinking of the white flight to the suburbs of like 40, 50 years ago. But in fact, right now, because of gentrification, we have a lot of oppressed nationality and working class flight to the suburbs, or even to what in California they call the exurbs. So where you have workers doing, you know, 2-hour one-way commutes because they can't afford to live closer in. And I teach at a community college right south of San Francisco, in the suburbs of San Francisco. And the biggest city around is Daly City. And I just looked at it, and I actually think from the statistics, it's actually only 10% white. So this idea of this white flight suburb, it's hard because they don't give the you know, they don't include Chicanos and Latinos. So I'm trying to estimate it. Statistics. It's actually only about 10% white, and it's majority Asian. And there's just growing numbers of suburbs like that. I know, well, Mike, you might know about this, like, what's that county right north of Washington, D.C.?
It is Montgomery County.
Okay.
That's what Walter.
Because what's that?
That's one of the richest counties in.
Oh, it's not that. Okay, I thought there was one that was largely black.
That's in Prince George County.
Prince George, right. So anyway, I better stop talking about DC.
No, DC. No, you make a great point. I think you know, I know Steph brought up a point about you know, Florida. You know, 60%, over 60% went to the polls and supported raising the minimum wage to $15. I mean, of course, it's Florida, so $15 by 2026. But you know, whatever. They went to vote to raise the minimum wage. And I thought, like 2 years ago, Andrew Gillum, he was a progressive Democratic candidate who ran as a pro-Bernie type of Democrat, supported Medicare for all, supported raising the minimum wage. He actually lost by 30,000 votes. Biden lost Florida by over 300,000. I think that kind of shows you know, when you cater demands towards mass needs like healthcare, like living wage, I think you get the results. You get actual results and support. Even if you look at Democratic candidates in the House of Representatives who supported Medicare for all, they all won. The Democratic candidates who were, you know, crappy centrist, you know, Wall Street types, they all lost. So of course, even within, you know, there's this conflict about why did they lose, and it's because they sucked and they didn't stand for anything. And the people who stand for something, you know, people are going to vote for them. So I think that's a significant factor. And even we talked about in the Black Belt, you know, this unprecedented vote coming from Georgia, a Black Belt state. You know, 2 Senate seats in Georgia, which is always Republican, are in play particularly because of the national movement, because of the Black vote kind of rising up and going to the polls. One of the candidates, Ralph Warnock, who actually wrote a letter, signed on to a letter that was critical of the Zionist state in Israel, in Palestine, occupied Palestine. So I think you're seeing I think we're kind of seeing that, like, the issues that we fight for every day, the issue that the masses care about, the people care about, is starting to actually materialize when they go vote. And like we said, we have to engage this process because the people still care about it, and we want to be exactly where the people are.
No, I agree. And and the antidote to white chauvinism is class solidarity. And and I think that our class struggle union approach in labor and our general approach in the people's movements of uh, the struggle against national oppression to the front has, gives us the ability and a guidepost to do that work. Uh, uh, in the short and long run. Our time is ticking away, and I want to respect people's time. So I feel like we should move to our last point. And there's a question from the chat that's exactly what we were going to get at. So. The person in the chat was like, I don't really think it's possible to push someone as conservative as Biden to the left. What can we do to pressure? What can we do to pressure Biden? How do we combat an attitude, a kind of everything is solved now attitude after the election? Or are we all going to spend the rest of our time going to brunch?
No, I mean, I think, there's just so much of this like thought that like we have to vote for somebody and we're going to get communism. You know what I mean? It's just like, these individuals, these politicians represent the class they serve, and it's all a result. Everything is about the conditions that exist at the time. And as, mass organizers and as communists, we're in these movements fighting for our class, which is the working class. So it's not about, are we going to push Biden to the left? It's, are we going to build a mass movement capable of pushing the whole country to the left and pushing the whole country towards socialism, and really building a movement for community control of the police, for legalization for all, for self-determination for Aslan and the Black Belt Nation. I mean, and for, building a multinational working class organization, which we are trying to do right now. I mean, that's what it's all about. The same thing that got us here is the same thing that's going to get us to the next thing. So we just have to stay vigilant and stay organizing. I mean, there's no, if you would have told me in 2012, I mean, we'd be where we are, and Trump would be president. But then in 2020, we'd have the largest mass mobilizations probably in the history of this country. I mean, I would have told you to stop smoking crack in 2020. But just those people who do that, shout out to Oregon for legalizing everything. As a people
PNW.
But we just got to keep organizing. With the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, we're gonna keep building new branches. We have over 12, 15 branches now. We're going to keep expanding. And we're going to keep building, fusing ourselves, within the working class, within the unions that we work at and struggle in, but also in our neighborhoods. I mean, that's how we're going to keep building. We're not dependent on Joe Biden to save us. The masses are the makers of history. We save ourselves.
Absolutely, Mike. I think it's really funny the way that this question was posed, and I would have to answer that I love brunch, and I especially love brunch with revolutionaries. But I will say too that Biden, while he is now in office, right, and maybe the 2.5 months that Trump has left over, he will execute some awful policies, some awful attacks on raza or Chicanos and the undocumented, right, or etc. Maybe he'll continue to build support behind Blue Lives, right? Because according to him, police need more money to kill us, right? To kill Chicanos, Native Americans, and Black folk, right? I would have to say that it's not over, absolutely. And I think what has proven how to mobilize ourselves is what we've done in history and what we've seen throughout history. It kind of influences the future, right? And part of why I'm a member of Freedom Road Socialist Organization is because we've taken very particular positions and also organized around them moving forward. Back when Obama and Biden were in office in 2008, when it started, back in 2012, when Obama was up for re-election, I was living in Florida and I was part of an organization called United We Dream. And, these dreamers who were undocumented came out, and while Obama was standing to be reelected, they said, we understand that you're being reelected, Obama, and that Romney's your biggest opposition right now, but we still demand that you, after 4 years, you haven't done much to make sure that we're protected as undocumented people. And that's when DACA came out, so there are ways that you can continue organizing. I don't think that Biden is going to, solve everything. I don't think that we should go under the illusion that he's our friend, especially the working classes. Venezuela, I'm wearing an Hugo Chavez shirt, right? Venezuela's architecture of oppression was actually built up during the Obama and Biden administration, right? And under Trump, it had already been perfectly set up so that they could, the US could lay down the hammer on Venezuela, right? And it's just gonna, I don't think that Biden's gonna turn around and dismantle all of that, because I don't think that that stands to be his position as somebody who's, defending the 1%, the super rich and the structure that is the United States. So I think that there is a lot of work to do. And exactly what Mike said, we're not trying to push Biden to the left, because why would we be organizing somebody who's obviously very well consolidated into the political structure that is the US's, right? We have to build our movement around us. We have to continue building a working class party of us, who will dismantle the system. And I think that being an FRSO member allows for that, because I've been able to help with that for the past 10 years. And, we're only getting more friends.
Yeah, no, I agree. We have to build a movement that the political class can't ignore, and change the context. I mean, I've just seen how the context in Jacksonville and Duval County, Florida, has changed. Just with the work that Mike and comrades and friends have been doing in Duval over the past period. It's getting down, doing the work on the ground. In labor, we have our approach is class struggle unionism, which means that we fight the boss and we fight the union bureaucracy if they won't let us fight the boss, if they try to stop us from fighting the boss. And that's the kind of approach, the kind that gives people clear guidance, that isn't abstentionist, that doesn't abstain from the hard parts of the struggle, but tries to engage in the whole struggle to change society. And we're not relying on changing anyone's minds. Masao, I saw that you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just, for my last word, two things. One, I think it's very important. We're going to be facing, in addition to the pandemic crisis, largely brought on by Trump's denialism and dismissal of science and politicization of what's a public health issue, we face economic disaster. As of December 26th, the last week of December, the pandemic unemployment assistance program and the long-term pandemic emergency unemployment compensation program, the PUA and the PEUC, sorry about the acronyms, which currently have 13 million people on them. In fact, they're the majority of people receiving government aid, and they were both set up during the CARES Act, and they're set to expire at the end of the year. And so, the Republicans in the Senate have been dragging their heels all year. They've never passed a single bill. They just have talking points and proposals and whatever. But that's going to be a really a terrible thing to happen for a lot of unemployed workers and people self-employed who lost their livelihood. The forbearance extensions on student loans ends at the same time. And also the CDC eviction moratorium will be ending too. So we have a big economic or intensification of the economic crisis before Trump gets out of office. Maybe the last word, I mean, yeah, it is true that, I mean, Biden is a career politician. He was raised in the, politically raised in the state of Delaware, which is like has the most corporate headquarters of any state per capita. So he's definitely a good old corporate centrist Democrat. But I think we can also look back to Lyndon Johnson, former vice president, became president. He was a Southern good old boy, mentored by you know, the white racist Democratic Party in the South. But under the pressure of the civil rights movement and the people's movement, you know, we got the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, overturning the racist 1924 Immigration Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start. It was really something that I think what Mike mentioned about changing the character of the country, that's what the movement was able to do. I think Biden, Johnson is also, though, a cautionary tale because, of course, he's best remembered for his disastrous war in Vietnam. And I think that will be, you know, this interventionist impulse on the part of these Democratic Party hawks embodied by, you know, people from Hillary Clinton to former Secretary of State Albright. That's the big one of the big dangers, I think, too, that we'll face under the Biden administration.
Nope. Yes. Our work continues more apace and probably even more intensely in the coming period. But I feel really honored, actually, to do that work with all of you as members of Freedom Road. And if anyone who's watching wants more information on joining Freedom Road, you can get it at our website, frso.org. But I wanted to thank everyone for their time. Thanks for watching. And I look forward to engaging with all of you in more good political discussion in the future.
Absolutely. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Good night.